All right, we're getting some live visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's kicked off his West Asia tour. And we expect the Prime Minister to, in fact, alight the flight. These are visuals that we are getting from the New Delhi airport, from where the Prime Minister will, of course, be boarding the flight to head over to Amman. And he's expected to land in Amman roughly at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, local time in Jordan. So the Prime Minister will be flying out in his flight, and this will, of course, be a historic visit in many ways. This is for the first time that an elected head of the government from India will be heading out to Palestine. He will be in Ramallah tomorrow, and he'll also be stopping over in Jordan. He's also expected to meet King Abdullah II in Amman later in the day. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi departs for his 4-day West Asia tour. This, of course, is going to be a visit that's going to be watched very, very closely in terms of the significance that it has in the way India has dehyphenated its policy when it comes to dealing with Israel and Palestine. There is a clear breakaway from the past in the manner in which India has treated its relationship with Israel and Palestine. And that, of course, is something that's been emphasized upon by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's now just got onto his flight and will be flying out to the capital of Jordan, Amman, in just a bit from now. These are live visuals that we are getting of the Prime Minister, who's beginning to leave for his West Asia tour. And in many ways, what will be looked at is the sort of the conclusions that would be drawn from his visit at Ramallah. He'll also be in the United Arab Emirates. There he's, of course, going to be inaugurating a temple and also will be interacting with members of the Indian diaspora like he always does. Now, the Middle East, remember, is one of the key areas where a lot of Indians have settled in the last 3-4 decades. In terms of the remittances which the Indian diaspora sends back, it's extremely significant. There are 3 million Indians who reside in just the United Arab Emirates alone, 3 million in Saudi Arabia, and we now will be watching very closely the developments that will take place. It's not just in terms of business deals, but also in terms of politics. Because remember, in the last 1 decade, India has broken away from the past policy of non-alignment, of taking a moral standpoint, of not having very close relationships with Israel, and has grown closer with the State of Israel, considering the kind of defense deals that we've signed with the State of Israel. But now this visit is crucial because it is for the first time that an elected head of the government, Prime Minister of India, will be heading over to Ramallah for the very first time. And to discuss more on this and the implications of this historic visit, we are joined in by our senior editor, Surya Gangadharan. Surya, we just saw the live visuals of Prime Minister Narendra Modi there departing on his 4-day West Asia tour. His first stop, of course, is going to be in Amman, but the big focus will be on his visit at Ramallah. How do you read Prime Minister Narendra Modi, with his proximity that we've seen with the State of Israel, also making a stopover at Ramallah?
Well, Ramallah is interesting because this is the first time an Indian Prime Minister is going there. So, in that sense, it's a major reiteration of India's commitment to the Palestinians. But it's also to dehyphenate the Palestine-Israel kind of relationship which has dogged our foreign policy for many years. So, in that sense, after welcoming Netanyahu some months ago, I think Prime Minister Modi is addressing the balance, moving to Ramallah. It's more of a symbolic thing because you know the kind of issues that face the Palestinians there, and it's not something that we can resolve. But the idea is to reach out to the people, and I think there's a commitment for a hospital and some other social projects that India is moving towards.
Absolutely, indeed. And also, do you think, Surya, that India may perhaps take a greater role in the Arab-Israeli peace process, considering that India and Israel now have very close relations in terms of the defense treaties that we have signed, in terms of, cooperation in other fields of technology. But now the Indian Prime Minister is also heading out to Palestine and is reaching out to them as well.
No, the point here is that who are the main players in that part of the world today? It's basically the Russians. The US has always been there. And you have a lot of regional players, all of whom basically are looking towards either Russia or to the US. So the big powers are the main players there. India can play a bit role, perhaps talking to somebody, providing good officers for some meeting or the other. But by and large today, even the Israelis and the Arabs, especially Saudi Arabia, UAE, they are all talking to each other. So in that sense, Israel is no longer the pariah state anymore, in the Arab world. There is a conversation going on. For all you know, and maybe in a few years' time, there could even be a diplomatic relation. So in that sense, it has moved far beyond the kind of thing that we can possibly provide.
That's an interesting point. Israel is no longer the pariah state. Saudi Arabia, in just a few days back, lifted off the blockade that it had of Indian flights flying over the Saudi airspace to reach out, to reach Israel. Now, considering the developments that have taken place here, Surya, do you see India's engagement being viewed very significantly? The US, some have, in terms of its recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, has rubbed the Palestinians the wrong way. So can India actually play a sort of more a balancing act when it comes to diplomacy in the Middle East?
I think India has already done that at the United Nations when it went along with the Palestinians in reiterating the status quo on Jerusalem. So in that sense, the point has already been made. And now the Prime Minister going to Ramallah and meeting President Mahmoud Abbas is another, again, underscoring the traditional India-Palestinian tie, But again, you have to see this alone as an India-Palestine thing. It has nothing to do with Israel or any of the other players in that part of the world. This is purely a bilateral thing.
Right.
And it is a reiteration of an old relationship that we've had with the Palestinians.
Absolutely. And apart from Ramallah, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be stopping over in Amman, and later he will also be heading over to the United Arab Emirates. So there is a very detailed itinerary that's been planned out for the Indian Prime Minister. Do you expect any big developments coming out from that visit in the United Arab Emirates and in Jordan?
Well, I believe there is a UAE commitment to invest some of their sovereign wealth funds in India. And so far, we haven't seen much of that money. So I presume the Prime Minister will again go and remind them that, this is something we're looking forward to, and secure some assurances on other security issues that bother India, especially the flow of jihadi funds into Kashmir from places like the UAE. This is something which has been bothering India for quite some time. We've been taking it up with the UAE authorities, and hopefully there'll be some movement forward on the score. Not to forget that in recent times, the UAE has extradited quite a few fugitives wanted in India on terror crimes. So in that sense, it'll be a good follow-through on that.
Right. So it's interesting, the various aspects that will be discussed as a part of the visit, and also considering what is in fact playing out in the Middle East. In terms of the blockade that some of the Gulf nations have imposed on the state of Qatar. UAE is one of the participants in that blockade. Do you think India would like to leverage any of its clout that it has, considering that a substantial part of our diaspora lives in the United Arab Emirates and also on the state of Qatar? Any developments that we can see on that front?
Saleh, it's important to understand that we are heavily dependent on the Saudis, on the flow of Persian Gulf oil to India. We have again depended on the fact that so many of our nationals live and work there.
Right.
So at all costs, we don't want to do anything that will disturb that kind of create a situation where these people have to come back or where those energy flows are interrupted. So we are very, very cautious about what we can do there. We are realistic about our expectations, what we can actually commit ourselves to doing. So in that sense, when we deal with the Arab world, when we deal with the Persian Gulf, we go with the awareness that we have certain advantages, but we also have certain weaknesses that need to be, constantly strengthened and bolstered.
Absolutely, indeed. And also in this context, Surya, we also heard of this conversation over the telephone that took place between US President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi just before he departed. Anything that you'd like to read into that? Or Donald Trump have said anything in terms of what India's role can be in Palestine now, considering the fact that the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, was effectively snubbed by the Palestinians?
The point here is that the Palestinians are weak, they are internally divided. What is it that they can offer the Americans? Frankly, very little. And the American commitment to Israel goes back many years.
So this, of course, is going to be a historic visit that will be watched very, very closely. In terms of the leverage that India has, like you pointed out, it appears that, in terms of the kind of outreach which Prime Minister Narendra Modi has, whenever he goes abroad, he interacts with the Indian diaspora. A similar such thing is also planned this time around as well. Is there any message that the Indian Prime Minister would like to give when he addresses the Indian diaspora later on in his visit?
I think basically to underscore the ties with India, the recall the connections that we have, and ensure that while their loyalties to India remain, they also work in the UAE to the manner possible and always show the flag as good Indians.
Is a historic visit. Thank you very much indeed, Surya Gangadharan, for having joined us and got us all those updates. Now, this is something that will be watched very closely over the course of the next 4 days, as the Indian Prime Minister will be in the Middle East. His first stop, of course, is going to be in Amman, and we also expect him to be in Ramallah tomorrow, and we'll be getting you all the details as the visit proceeds. Let's now take a look at some of the other stories where US President Donald Trump has spoken on the phone with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, as the two leaders discussed a variety of issues, including the ongoing Maldives crisis. The two leaders discussed the war in Afghanistan, the political crisis in the Maldives, the plight of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar, and North Korea's nuclear program. Donald Trump and Narendra Modi also discussed further steps to denuclearize North Korea and agreed to strengthen security and economic cooperation ahead of the ministerial dialogue in the month of April.